I am delighted that you have joined us for today's webinar, Reclaiming the Right to Walk, Learning from a Century of Pedestrian Advocacy. My name is Dr. Asha Weinstein Agrawal, and I'm the Director of Education at the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State. MTI is a university transportation center funded by the US DOT that leads 3 multi-university programs. And our work focuses on increasing mobility for all by improving the safety, efficiency, accessibility, and convenience of our nation's transportation system. We accomplish all this through surface transportation research, technology transfer, education, and workforce development. And as a side note on education, I want to mention that we offer an online graduate program in transportation management. There's a link that just went into the chat if you'd like to learn more. I'm actually the director, so you can always follow up with me with questions. Now, MTI is fortunate to have many co-sponsors for this webinar, and they are the Vision Zero Network, ITE San Francisco Bay Area section, APA NorCal chapter, WTS San Francisco Bay Area chapter, the San Jose State University Department of History, America Walks, and California Walks. Now, today's webinar, we are featuring 2 speakers as we reflect on the history of the movement for pedestrian rights and think about how that history can inform today's policy and advocacy work to bring street space back for safe and convenient walking. I'll introduce our 2 speakers now, and then we'll move on to the presentations. But we'll have Peter Norton, who will be speaking first. And Peter is Associate Professor of History in the Department of Engineering and Society at the University of Virginia. His publications include 2 books particularly relevant to today's webinar. One is Fighting Traffic, The Dawn of the Motor Age in the American City. And the other book is Autonorama, The Illusory Promise of High-Tech Driving. Peter is himself a walker, a bicycle rider, and a frequent speaker on the past and future of urban mobility. After Peter gives us our historical context, we'll have Leah Shahum speaking. She is the founder and director of the Vision Zero Network, a nonprofit helping to advance Vision Zero, safe mobility across the U.S. As a German Marshall Fund Fellow, Leah researched Vision Zero strategies in Sweden, Germany, and the Netherlands. And prior to that, she was the executive director of the 10,000-member San Francisco Bicycle Coalition and also served as a policymaker on the boards of directors of the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency and the Golden Gate Bridge Highway and Transportation District. Welcome, both of you, to Peter and Leah. Now, for our audience, some quick notes. We are recording this webinar, and shortly after we conclude, you'll get an email and the link will be available if you want to pass it around or rewatch it. And yes, if you have questions, you can put them into either the chat or the Q&A. We won't have a huge amount of time for questions at the end, but a little bit. Now, today's organization of the event is first Peter is going to present his research, then Leah will present her thoughts on what can we take away from the historical record to help us in work today to improve pedestrian safety, and then we'll open it up to a conversation. So let's get started. Peter, we'll begin with you. Would you like to share your slides?
Yes, it's a pleasure. I'm calling them up now. And I think I have them up. And thank you for your introduction, Asha. It's a delight to be joining the Mineta Transportation Institute, and I'm particularly honored and happy to be paired with Leah Shahum because I really admire the work she does, and she and I have been crossing paths in that work for years now. So it's a great joy to be with you all. I love the stress in this talk on the right to walk. If we recognize walking as a right, then so much else follows from that we can help, that can help us get to a better place. I want to frame this in historical terms because I don't think we can understand the status quo until we understand what it's made of. And the status quo is always made of the legacies of the past and versions of the past that we've heard and learned and been told sometimes mislead us about the status quo and therefore also about how to get to a better future. We've been struggling with this problem for a long time, especially since the automobile age began about 100 or 110 years ago, where pedestrians have rights on paper that in practice are very hard to exercise, and even those rights are very limited. And this cartoon from 1927, I think, captures that dichotomy quite clearly. It shows that experts have not completely ignored this pedestrian. On paper, they offer her something, but in practice, it's far less than what she really needs to actually exercise her right to walk. I want to recognize also that the Mineta Transportation Institute, being based at San Jose State University, has a place in the history of the criticism of automobile domination. In 1970, during a environmental fair connected with Earth Day, students buried a 1970 Ford Maverick in a grave as if to signify a departure from the automobile domination of the past. And that happened right there in San Jose, back when it was San Jose State College. Now, this particular criticism of the automobile is associated with the counterculture, with student movements of the 60s and the 70s. And I want to offer you a different perspective today that shows that actually, while Americans welcomed automobiles, it was mainstream Americans who resisted automobile domination, and the actual radical fringe were the proponents of car priority everywhere. That was the radical group. The status quo of, say, 120 years ago is beautifully captured in this picture of Rochester in 1904, where if you look, you will see people walking at will. You'll see electric vehicles in the center of the street. These, of course, are electric vehicles in the form of streetcars, not SUVs with 500 kilogram batteries. You'll see lots of bicycles. The bicycle racks are overflowing. You see walkable, livable density. There's even affordable housing all around this view as well. This is, in a way, our fondest aspiration today. What I'm trying to suggest here is that this was part of our history, that it was once normal, and therefore it can be normal again. We know how to do it. It doesn't take futuristic tech. Futuristic tech can help, but we know what we really need to do, and this picture captures it very nicely. Now, we can compare this view of a street in Rochester, New York, against the same view approximately today, and see just where we have, how much we have lost. But the right to walk in streets was affirmed, and in this case by the California Supreme Court in 1871, which held unanimously that not only do people have a right to walk in the streets, children do, and children even have a right to play unattended. Everyone else has the responsibility of looking out for them. So the right to walk, including the right to use the streets for people on foot, people rolling, people riding bikes, and children playing, was an official establishment position, not a radical fringe position, as this California Supreme Court ruling held back then. This is an era when the traffic priority pyramid was the opposite of what it is today. Pedestrians came first. Vehicles were at the bottom of the priority list. And the faster and more individual the vehicle, the lower the priority was. We see this value expressed also in children's use of the streets 100 years ago, where a conscientious and dutiful mother was the one who showed her small children how to use the streets, unlike today when we might fault her for her guiding children to use the streets on their own. What happened in the 1920s was people interested in promoting ever more sales of automobiles and also of roads and pavements and fuels, fought for what they called a radical revision in our conception of what a city street is for. That was their terms. This editorial from 1922 is arguing for a inverse of that pyramid. In other words, for the form of the pyramid that we have today, with automobiles on top. They were the ones who considered their position radical. They were, in effect, a kind of a counterculture, if we view a counterculture as contrary to the majority position. That was what they fought for, and they succeeded. The pictures you're seeing there, two pictures side by side, are the same view in 1904 and in 2022. The street is practically deserted. There's a few automobiles, but almost no one is walking or riding a bike, and there's no public transit available for those who do. Because make no mistake, public transportation is a means of supporting and enabling walkability as well as a mode of transportation in itself. Now, this suggests, I think, that we know what to do. We've had a radical revision before. We can learn from it, apply the lessons from it, add to it the technology of our time, and we can have a radical revision again, at least where walking makes the most sense, as it certainly does in this urban setting in these pictures. Now, you will find lots of purported explanations for why Americans don't walk very much, for why walking is dangerous, why they don't take transit very much compared to people in other countries. And you'll find these explanations all over the place, including in official publications like this one. And in these publications, the argument is that people just prefer to drive. In this case, Californians prefer to drive. This, I propose to you, is an insane position because, of course, we don't know what people prefer to do when they have no good choices. People are refraining from taking transit most often because there's no reliable transit available to them. Nevertheless, this position that car domination is merely the reflection of people's preferences is bizarrely ubiquitous even in official publications. Many of these owe their perspective ultimately to the notion that Americans have a love affair with the automobile, a thesis that was put forth by General Motors back in 1961. In fact, this radical revision, this effort to put cars first over everything else, began as an effort to protect motorists from restrictions that were being promoted in response to the catastrophic safety record of automobiles and streets, reflected in these bar charts from the 1920s, where you can see that pedestrians and children were especially vulnerable to traffic violence. And the blame of that era, as this New York Times article illustrates, was on the driver, not on the people in the streets. In this illustration, people are all over the street, but they are not being blamed, as you can tell from this iconography. What the automobile interest groups wanted to do was shift the responsibility away from the drivers toward the pedestrians. They achieved this in part through social norms campaigns, through new engineering standards, and also through new traffic ordinances like this one written for the city of Los Angeles, which was implemented in 1925, 100 years ago exactly. And when it was introduced, there was a lot of resentment. Even in Los Angeles, the ultimate motor city for driving, people resented these laws restricting walking in favor of driving. This was in an era when the majority were walking or riding streetcars, and very often these also disproportionately disadvantaged women because when a family had a car, it was usually monopolized by the husband in the family, leaving the woman in the family often with diminished mobility. Nevertheless, this Los Angeles traffic ordinance of 1925 became a model for the whole country. It was promoted to the whole country through this form of the Model Municipal Traffic Ordinance. The ordinances we have today throughout the U.S. are descended from this. This was not the result of mass popular preferences, democracy, consumer choice, or any other such development. It was resented, as this cartoon illustrates as well. It was might over right, or right makes might makes right. That is the backdrop for these cartoons. Now, many of us in this meeting will know that such car domination has been resisted successfully in other countries. This is Amsterdam in 1972, when Dutch people were resisting car domination, often in the form of illegal demonstrations demanding better. What's far less well known, practically unknown, is that Americans have a tradition of this too. It's much older. Compare this view in Amsterdam with this one from Philadelphia from 20 years earlier, where mothers are blocking streets, demanding slower traffic so that they and their children, usually who had no access to a car during the day, can have safer streets so that they can get around their neighborhood in Philadelphia. Such protests were ubiquitous. They have been omitted from the historical record, not by accident. Nevertheless, they were ubiquitous throughout urban, suburban, and even small-town America. Protests like this one in suburban Los Angeles were very common. There's another one from Philadelphia in 1972. This is Camden, New Jersey in 1976. We have a history in this country of demanding the right to walk, the right to the safe and convenient use of our own local streets on foot, on bikes, in wheelchairs, and in other non-vehicular modes of transportation. We have seen some encouraging trends in recent years. In 2022, Los Angeles and the state of California suspended its jaywalking laws. There's still a lot of restrictions, but nothing like what they used to be. And today we see some wonderful legacies of this resistance. Back in 1976, my city of Charlottesville, Virginia, pedestrianized its main street, and it's been a very successful example, as this picture, I think, captures. We've also seen this happen in San Jose as well. The Paseo de San Antonio in the middle of San Jose by San Jose State University is a great illustration of this, and in some ways it's a better illustration than Charlottesville's Main Street pedestrian zone, because it's also well served by public transportation, which is an important element in promoting the right to walk and walkability in general. So our history shows us that the status quo we have today is not the product of technological progress, mass preferences, consumer demand, democracy, or free market economics. It's the result of a deliberate radical revision that put motor vehicles, particularly passenger cars, on top. And the lesson of that history, I think, is that we can do this again and have a second radical revision. I don't mean to suggest that it would be a reversion to the past, but rather a new 21st century version, applying the tech that we have to a common sense mobility future in which the right to walk is the basis of a inclusive, equitable, sustainable, and affordable mobility future for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter, for sharing that whirlwind tour of the history. And we are now going to turn to our second speaker, Leah Shahum, to hear her reflect on what we can take away from this past to help us in our work currently.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks to Mineta Institute and everyone organizing, Asha and the team. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to follow Peter. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I fell into this world, but I will say that Peter has been, and his work as a historian and an amazing communicator, has been a big part of my evolution of thinking and in my work. So I just want to say thank you. It's a real honor. And I'm going to try to move really quickly because there's a lot to cover here. Maybe I'll just start by mentioning a little bit about our work at Vision Zero Network. And I've entitled kind of what I'm focusing on is shifting the paradigm for safe mobility. Certainly that is around the right to walk, people walking, but for everyone, walking, biking, driving, transit, everyone. But really thinking about this as a paradigm shift. And I want to first start, for people that may not be familiar with, introducing our work. Vision Zero Network, please check us out at visionzeronetwork.org. We're a small nonprofit based also here in Northern California, but working across the country. And we're helping communities that are interested in the goal of Vision Zero. So that's the goal of zero traffic deaths or severe injuries. So really setting that ambitious, but we think absolutely morally appropriate and an appropriate goal of safe mobility for everyone. So we have lots of resources online and do events and such. So please check that out if you've not yet seen our work. So I wanted to start a little bit with, excuse me, my own coming into this work, partly because I knew I'd be talking with Peter here, which is exciting, but also because I think it's sometimes telling what brings us to something. It's a picture of me, sorry, I should say, a picture of me with my orange bike, which I still have, standing on the streets of the Mission District in San Francisco. I love this one because I've got the orange tulips matching the orange bike, not planned. Gives a little bit of that Dutch vibe there, like the Dutch bike. But I got my start in this field working with the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. I went on, as Asha introduced me, to serve on the policy boards of several transportation districts that decide policy around the Bay Area. But my work was really around the Bicycle Coalition. And I had when I started it, I had no planning background, no engineering background, no formal advocacy background by any means. I really fell into this work, thank goodness not literally, but kind of fell into it because I was trying to get around the city on a bicycle just because it was easier and faster, not because I had some, huge political leaning towards bicycling, or not necessarily that I was doing it for the environment or for health or for, again, political reasons or social reasons per se. I was biking because it was much easier than, frankly, driving anywhere. I didn't have a car, didn't want a car at that point, too much of a hassle in a busy city like San Francisco. And the transit was really not dependable at that time and is often a little bit hinky. So I was biking everywhere. And that's really how I fell into this work at the Bicycle Coalition. I always come back to that because I think, gosh, this is really an issue of kind of choice and convenience and ease. I was very lucky to be able to bike to most places, and I wanted to be able to do that. But it was not as safe and convenient and easy as it should have been. And now I'm going to jump ahead many years. In 2013, and if you can see, it's a little picture here. This is a memorial site. It's a photo of a memorial site of a little girl named Sophia Liu, who was hit and killed in San Francisco while walking with her mother, hand in hand, in a crosswalk. So Sophia was walking on New Year's Day. Her date of death is December 31st, 2013. She was walking with her mother hand in hand in a crosswalk and was hit and killed by a driver of a car. Sophia was on a street called Polk Street, and don't expect you to know that, but I'll just say it's very close to my heart because in my job at the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, for at least 10 years, we had advocated for safety improvements on Polk Street. It was one of the known most dangerous streets and still is. Speeds are too high. It's a small street, but a lot of walking and biking and transit use, yet people drive too fast and there really were not good conditions. So it was especially gripping when Sophia was hit and killed on New Year's Eve day. And that's when I really had my own awakening around the goal of zero. I knew that at the Bicycle Coalition, we were working hard. We were making improvements around biking, definitely around walking too. But when I realized that we knew this shouldn't have been a surprise. I hate to say that, but Sophia's death could have been prevented, and so many other deaths around my city and probably your communities too could have been prevented with changes in speed, with changes in street design. And it's something that really, really mobilized me in 2013 to go out and start my Vision Zero work. I'm going to quickly move through a few more San Francisco photos. This is San Francisco's World Day of Remembrance a few years ago. I just want to highlight the year 2021 because in the US, we reached a 16-year high in this country of traffic deaths. That same year, just a few years ago, we reached a 40-year high, meaning not for 40 years did we have such a high number of pedestrian deaths specifically. So here we are on the steps of San Francisco City Hall. and really thinking about every single one of the lives lost here. And, Peter did such a good job explaining or giving some glimpse into, I know, the history, but I'm going to run through just more recently where we are. We know that nationally, traffic deaths are a leading cause of death in general, but particularly among youth. We know that people walking in low-income communities, poorer communities, are much more highly likely, 3 times more likely to be hit and killed by drivers than in high-income areas. We know also that Black communities of color, particularly Black people, are 80% more likely to be killed by drivers while walking than white people in America. We also know that this doesn't have to be the way. So I'm going to kind of shift to what can we do to change it? And this is really what got me motivated. Again, I think after Sophia Liu's death in 2013, to really think differently about my advocacy. Let me pause and explain this. This is new data, and if you haven't seen it yet, I'll ask to share it through the Mineta Institute in the follow-up. This just came out about a month ago, 2 months ago, from the Centers for Disease Control. Not getting a ton of attention, but I wish it would. This is showing that traffic-related pedestrian deaths, not surprisingly, as we know, or it is surprising, but have increased significantly in the US, 50% over the last decade, roughly. Meanwhile, in other high-income nations, so the CDC compared the US to 27 other high-income nations, where they are decreasing their pedestrian deaths specifically, overall traffic deaths, but particularly pedestrian deaths. So this is not just a time and a place. And I think to the point of the history, it's so important to know that things have been different in the past, because we can look and say they can be different in the future. And in fact, things are changing and going in the right direction, a safer direction, in other countries right now, countries across the world. So not just the quaint European nations, yes, those too, but also Canada, Australia, New Zealand, places where they have more similar land use as we do. They are making change now. So I think this is added to the history that Peter talked about, I think really, I hope, optimistic. But what it brings us back to is, we get what we design for. We get the results we design for. And this image might be a little bit kind of, overdone of like, okay, is everything a highway, a freeway, interloop? No, it's not. But this picture shows, I think, a lot more real, or both are realistic, but a lot more common, the problems we are dealing with, right? Here's a group of folks that probably want to cross the street to get to a restaurant, to get to a bus stop, to get to a shopping area, to get to the Walmart, whatever it is, to get home. And they're crossing 6 lanes of traffic here, wide, fast-moving lanes of traffic. This is not a safe and comfortable environment, right? This is the one, again, yes, this image gets it across, but this is the one we're really dealing with. This is most of our, highly dangerous streets for people, particularly for people walking and everyone, but are designed in a way that is really thinking about that throughput of cars, not for the safe walking of folks here. Similarly, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the vehicles, we know for a fact, we could go on all day. This is not a safe situation, yet we have passenger vehicles that are this large, that the driver of that vehicle, if I'm sitting there trying to drive that vehicle, there's no way I can see that little guy in front of me. That is just literally poor design, and we're going to get the results that we designed for. But we can make change. And I'm kind of looking ahead now. I titled this Paradigm, Shifting the Paradigm, and I went back and looked at the definition of paradigm to really make sure I was using it right. But a paradigm is a framework of thought or a set of assumptions, attitudes, concepts, and values that are widely accepted within a particular discipline or field. More simply put, paradigm defines a way of looking at or thinking about something. And right now, we have a paradigm in this country that getting somewhere fast and quote unquote conveniently and easily is the most important thing. Even if we don't say it out loud, we have a paradigm that has prioritized speed over safety and convenience, or the impression of convenience over safety. And I'm just going to highlight a few things here real quickly these are very high level because we don't have enough time to go in, but to really highlight how we can make change. And I'm going to end with a few specific asks for people here. But to think about what we need. It's not just about caring more. It's not just, and that's what I realized when Sophia Liu's death occurred in 2013. We were working really hard at the Bike Coalition. I cared a lot in my advocacy work. I was working as a policymaker, as an advocate. My team and I and advocates were advocating every day. But it wasn't just about caring and demanding the change. It was really about calling out what we needed more of and what we needed less of, or stopping. It wasn't just about caring more and advocating harder, right? And saying the right things. It was really about calling out and saying, you know what, not everything is created equal. There's certain things that are safe and certain things that are not. And we need to do the things that are safe and stop doing or do less of the things that are not safe. So starting with this very high level, stop accepting traffic deaths as a fait accompli. To really pause and say, this is not the way it needs to be. Other countries are doing better, and we in the US, as Peter described, have done better. So my first ask of folks, it's a really simple phrase, you've probably seen this, but the concept of crash, not accident. Let's stop calling them accidents. Words are words, I understand that, but it's a great opening, it's even a great opening salvo kind of to have a conversation with someone to actually, is it an accident? Is this something that could have been prevented if we had designed that street differently? If we had made those changes on Polk Street in San Francisco that we've been calling for 10 years, would Sophia Liu be alive today? We don't know, but she may have been. So really thinking about these not as accidents that are out of the blue, like a meteor falling from the sky with zero, forewarning. In fact, these crashes are largely predictable and preventable, and we need to make choices. So some of the choices are, I mentioned vehicles. Stop supersizing our vehicles. Again, we get the results we designed for with this vehicle and this makeup. This is probably a little bit maybe over optimistic on the right. This looks like the Netherlands to me. This tiny car and lots of bikes. But really thinking about, let's use the tools we need for our jobs. Do we need that giant vehicle for somebody just going to the store every day, right? How do we incentivize smaller vehicles, safer vehicles? How do we incentivize transit? How do we incentivize walking and biking? All of these things we can do. They're policy choices, they're decisions. We can also stop prioritizing high-speed roads and high speeds and start prioritizing safety, like I mentioned. We can do that by lowering speed limits. We can do that by redesigning this road. So this concept of, wow, these other nations, how are they doing it? They're making choices every single day in their policies and in their street design that we could do here in the US, that we can do, and that some cities are doing. I'm not going to get into too many examples, but we know it's happening in some places, but needs to be happening more holistically, needs to be scaled up. We need to be setting and designing for 20 miles per hour in cities, in communities, even suburban areas like the one on the left, the picture where you have people walking and biking. So these are choices. They will take time, they will take energy, but they don't cost $1 zillion. They're not impossible. Others are to stop victim blaming and start looking at what is actually underneath these terrible crashes and injuries and deaths. So this is one of my least favorite images, but when I share to make a point, but this, I forget what city this is. I don't want to call it out, but this is an education campaign, saying basically don't go out wearing black at night, don't make yourself bright and colorful when you're out walking. I would say let's make the environment safe. Let's make sure that we're investing in good lighting, investing in good safe streets and crossing spaces and timing for the lights, and not putting it on an individual to make sure that they're doing something differently when their environment is not built for safety. Another is stop prioritizing level of service and start prioritizing level of safety. This is a little bit wonky for the engineers and planners on the line, but really thinking about how we make our decisions right now. A lot of the pictures I've showed of kind of the negative images, right, of the non-friendly walking places, it's because there's 6 lanes of traffic because they are prioritizing the speed and convenience of people driving and not the safety of everyone, the safety of people driving, walking, and biking. You can have both. And you should have both. And I want to just pull this quote. I'm winding down. This is a quote from the U.S. Department of Transportation's National Roadway Safety Strategy that came out about 4 years ago now. So under the last administration, and we're really hoping and trying to still hold on to this. you see these different elements of a safe system approach, which are all very important, right? We've talked about safe vehicles, safe speeds, safe roads, safe road users. Yes, people need to be responsible. Of course, post-crash care is very important. But I love this definition of the people, the safe people section, or safe road users. I think it's called safe road users here. A lot of times what this definition especially in our federal guidance will say is things like, encourage and educate and enforce so that people do the right thing. I'm paraphrasing, but help people do the right thing. Yes, absolutely. We want to encourage people to do the right thing, right? But here, I really appreciate the second half. What this roadway safety plan calls on is encourage safe, responsible behavior by people with roads and create conditions that prioritize their ability to reach their destination unharmed. So really winding down to say, we want to link these things. People can be safe when their conditions allow them to be safe, when the streets are safe, when the policies encourage safety. So I want to end on that high note and pass it back to Asha of, how do we really help safe road users, people walking, fit into this entire overall safe system approach? We got to make sure that they're connected and not just put it on the shoulders of the people walking.
Thank you so much, Leah.
Thank you.
It's both depressing and sad, but also hopeful. By the way, I live on a 2-lane residential street, and last week a pedestrian was killed 100 feet from our house. I don't know the details other than I think it was a drunk driver speeding. So focusing on the behaviors is obviously very important too. Anyway, let us now turn to some questions with our speakers. And a number of you had written in ahead of time with questions. I know some of you have put some things into the chat or the Q&A. Unfortunately, we can't, of course, cover everything, but I want to start with a few that are kind of based on some of the things that came in earlier. One, and this is a question to both of you, and maybe Peter, since it focuses on history, you could start. Does the historical record offer us insight in how to advocate with policymakers effectively if they are still viewing streets more through that car-centric lens?
Oh, yes. So policymakers respond to pressure. This is their job. They don't respond to reason so much as pressure because it's in the nature of their work that they simply cannot resist the pressures that are on them. And I think a lesson of the first radical revision, the one that put cars first on our streets practically everywhere, is that we need pressure on 3 fronts simultaneously. And those fronts are the laws, including the rules of where you can walk and where you can't, and where you can drive and how you drive. Second is the engineering standards. Leah mentioned, for example, level of service, which is defined for us, but we can redefine level of service, as one of the commenters has aptly suggested. And that's a second front that needs attention. And the third front is social norms. We grew up, if audience members who grew up in this country, in the US, know that we learned from childhood that the street is for cars. That was a radical idea when it was introduced a century ago. We can succeed if we work on all 3 fronts simultaneously. When we work on one front in isolation, the other 2 tend to conspire in ways that defeat that kind of more singular effort.
Thank you. And Leah, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think it's just, there's I'll just add, and this is building on I think what we've both been saying, but it's sometimes hardest to get out of what is kind of a level of inaction or complacency, right? And I think in this scenario, it's been a little bit more of wow, is this terrible obvious thing is happening and we need it to stop happening. In fact, we've been kind of conditioned through so many layers of socializing, et cetera, and so much of the history Peter talked about, to not even seeing what the dangers and the problems are. It's a lot sometimes harder to organize against that thing, right? To make change against something that isn't so obvious and glaring. So I think part of what we've been trying to do through the Vision Zero work is a little bit call out vision zero, the goal of zero traffic deaths. And a lot of times you get people kind of startled and go zero, you're crazy. That's so overambitious. That's impossible. But you pause and say, well, let's think about it. Now let's break it down, So, kind of shaking people a little bit out of the complacency. I think we need to do that more. Yeah, I'll end there.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. And one question that just came in, and a lot of the examples that you had both shared were more about urban areas. Do you have any insights to offer about rural areas and small towns? Historically, has there been sort of the same kind of advocacy, Peter, in those communities? And Leah, then you can follow up.
Well, the automobile in this country in particular began as a way to serve isolated rural populations, particularly to help farmers get produce to railheads and to markets for shipping to larger markets where they could sell their produce, which I think is a useful reminder of the fact that the automobile is a useful tool. We have misrepresented it as an all-purpose solution. So let's think about what it is particularly suitable for and not try to rebuild the world so that it becomes the all-purpose solution. Now, you do find, though, from the beginning of the automobile era for decades, a persistent interest in ways to walk and get around small rural communities safely. The typical town of 100 or 200 people was still a walkable place where residences and shops were close together, and proximity works as well in small communities as it does in big cities.
Leah. And you're muted.
Thank you. I am always reminded or struck quickly that the goal of Vision Zero and the framing of Vision Zero started in Sweden. People may know that, but it started in rural communities. Not only did it start in rural communities, it started in a driver on driver perspective. And by that, I mean, we in the US, I think, associate Vision Zero and this focus on safety more with walking and biking these days, because frankly, that's where we've had the loudest advocacy, because we've had the greatest need, we've had the greatest problems and impact. But interestingly, this concept started with head-on vehicle collisions in rural areas. So absolutely. And if I could, looking ahead, I'm adding in the chat there, one thing I'd encourage folks to do, because rural communities have a really big opportunity here, is apply for funding through the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program. This is a federal grant program that's in about its third or fourth year. You can learn more here about this. A lot of opportunity for small communities, medium communities, rural, suburban, urban, everybody. A lot of planning money, not just for planning street design changes and such. It could be about studying to understand better. What are our issues? Maybe we have a really small community, so we don't have a quote unquote high number of traffic deaths, but we do have certain intersections or areas that feel really edgy and scary for someone walking. So that's important, right? So how do we address that problem that is a perception and an issue to help encourage people to walk more? So I'd say I hope people check it out.
Thank you. By the way, we're going to run a few minutes longer because we're having such a good discussion. But for those of you who do need to drop off at 12:45, we will be sharing the slides and the recording. And so share with your friends. I also just want to mention that MTI has another webinar, I think tomorrow maybe. Alvarine is going to put some information about that into the chat if you would like to join. And I think those are my sort of, and thank you very much to all of our sponsors who really helped get the word out. I've noticed at least 4 different countries we've had audience members from, and certainly across the country. So it's wonderful to see kind of how broad the interest and concern with this topic is. But I'd like to do 1 or 2 more questions for those who can stay. So you both at points alluded to what other countries are doing, whether historically or currently. Are there any particularly valuable lessons that we can perhaps take from this international experience that would work and fit in an American context? And Leah, do you want to start this time?
Yes, I will. I'm gonna mention one that's very timely, and because it's getting some traction. The use of and normally I wouldn't be the first to say, "Yay, technology!" But here's a technology that is very well proven: intelligent speed assistance, which limits how fast a car can go. It's been used in other countries, places like Europe, for a long, long time. And we're just starting to use it in the US in a more regular way. So I want to give some kudos, and I'll put a link in here, where 3 states, just in the past 2 months, Virginia, Washington, and Georgia, and a few more thinking about it, are requiring or allowing for intelligent speed assistance or speed limiters on the vehicles of people who have repeat speeding or reckless driving offenses. So just like people may be familiar with the idea of an alcohol interlock system, if you're accused of drunk or convicted, I should say, of drunk driving multiple times in a state, you would have be able to drive still if you have this alcohol interlock. Same sort of thing where you're like, hey, if you've had a problem with speeding repeatedly, you can drive a car because you may need it because our country's set up that way, unfortunately. You may need to drive, but you're not going to be allowed to speed again. So I think this intelligent speed assistance is one that we should be incorporating really across the country, and I'll add some information there.
Thank you. And Peter.
Well, one of the problems we have in transit is the problem of getting to the station from home and then getting from the destination station to your final destination. And I'd like to point to a method they use in the Netherlands that has worked beautifully. What we've tended to do here is try to supply ample parking at both places, which is very expensive, very demanding, and also only serves those people who do have access to a car. And once people get in the car, they tend to want to just take it all the way to their final destination. But in the Netherlands, when you get to your final train station and you still have a couple of miles to go to your final destination, your train ticket or your bus ticket will also get you a public transport bike. And state-of-the-art tech can make sure there's a bike for you. It even tells you where in the bicycle parking garage you can find your bike, and when you return it, where the easiest place to return it to. And that tech has really made public transportation a much better service for all. You don't need a car to get to the station, and you don't need to get an Uber or a cab to get to your final destination either. I think we could learn a lot from that very successful model.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to wrap up with just one last super short question for both of you. So if you could imagine, say, 10 years into the future, what's like one ambitious goal that you hope will be realized to further pedestrian rights in the United States? And I don't know who wants to go first.
Leah? Sure, I'll start. Yeah. Thank you. I think it would be that every single transportation and land use decision that was made in the filter of safe mobility. Mm-hmm. Yes, mobility and safe mobility. That would be the filter and the decision-making process.
Right. Thank you. And Peter?
My dream would be experts discover unlocked resources in the form of urban surface parking lots as a way to supply affordable housing close to destinations without a mandatory parking, so that people can live near where they work in what used to be asphalt deserts.
Okay, well, those are two, from my perspective, at least, beautiful visions. I hope that in 10 years they will have come true. And thank you again so much to both of our speakers. This was an amazing conversation and so much for us to learn. Again, thanks for our sponsors. And check your email for those of you still with us. You'll later be getting the recording. And with that, I will wish everybody a hopefully safe and good rest of the day.
Thank you.